G'day everyone, welcome to the Outback Packers podcast, the podcast where two mates from all the way across the world have a yarn talking Packers football in the green and gold. I'm Nick Gregory with my co-host, as always, Joe Pearson, today joined by the host of Game On Wisconsin's Freezer podcast, Sanjay Murthy. How are you, Sanjay? It's great to finally get to talk to you. We're kind of digging into the O-line today on this episode. How did you go in your travels watching film, and how are you?
Nate the Great, Joe. It is great to be on here. Obviously, it's a huge honor. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to do this with you guys. It's kind of my first time back on the mic because we are on off-season mode, so we kind of go a little hiatus. Kind of rinse and get ourselves ready for the next season. Obviously, we got to wait Rodgers' decision, and once the Super Bowl is over, kind of things start to get a little bit more ramped up. But this is kind of cool to be back behind the mic now, and excited to be here.
Well, I guess the first question I have for you is I've been bringing it up with every episode, and we might as well do it until it gets figured out. Where are you on the Rodgers situation?
Whew, yeah, isn't that the $1 million question? I've had this coworker at where I am at, and he has been on the board. He has preached his J Love, you know, loyalty for the longest time, and I was giving him crap. I'm like, there's no way. Like we have our MVP, we have the guy we need. This is how we win games. When Jordan Love's time is ready, it'll be time. And then I got to this year, and I saw a lot every single game. It became more laughable than it really became disappointing. And as you guys probably already know, but then you have this little run, right? You get this little 5-game win streak, and you're like, holy crap, this is happening. This is a la 2016, or whatever phrase you want to use that Rodgers has had, and he's made these comebacks, and you're like, okay, maybe this might be we could right the ship as long as we get in the playoffs. Didn't happen though. So to answer your question, I am Team Jordan Love. If they do bring back Rodgers, I'm not going to hate it. I just know what this is 2 years in a row where you're kind of like, man, we didn't really maximize our opportunity to get something for this guy. And I think right now, for me saying Jordan Love, I'm only saying that because you can maximize your opportunity right now and get something for this guy, even if it's not as much as you could have got from when he won his MVP. I do think he can be used. Some teams are going to be desperate, like the Jets, like the Raiders, whatever it is, and you can get that high pick, whether it's 7 or if it's, I'm sorry, what's Jets at 13?
Something
Or
like
15,
that, yeah.
something like that.
13.
Whatever it may be, even if it's not more than just that, that's already a win. Because I thought you were probably going to get 2 firsts or something, with the last year's haul compared to this year's haul. So that's what I'm here for. I'm here for. I've always been on team. Let's move for the future. We were just talking about off camera, Joe. I'm actually for the don't bring back Mason Crosby because I'm looking at moving to the future. I'm always thinking it's like Ted Thompson. It's better to get away from a guy a year, early than it is a year late. And I think we're 2 years late on Aaron Rodgers. Yes, he won the MVP, but I think we kind of missed the opportunity to just kind of look. Let's just go through the growing pains with Jordan Love if he's the guy, because that stems to a bigger question after I just answered this one, and that's about Matt LaFleur. And this is his chance now to see, is he the coach? Because now you get probably a 2-year window with J Love if this is how this goes, to see if this is truly going to be a working relationship.
And of course, we, here on the podcast, we'll be talking about it more when we get into the quarterbacks. But, like I've been saying week in and week out, I just want a conclusion. Be back, don't be back. Just give me a conclusion. And I've said this a lot too. I don't know how many times we heard out of Rogers' mouth. I don't want to have a Favre situation. I don't want to have a Favre situation. Well, right now we're in a Favre situation because it's like year in, year out. Well, is he? Is he not? Although I will say that I think a lot of the questioning is media created more than it is team or player created, just for the clicks or the likes or whatever they get out of it, because you've never once really heard out of Rodgers' mouth, except for to answer a question, I don't want to come back, or, maybe it's time for me to hang it up or whatever. He had always been adamant he wanted to play till 40. Then at age 40, it was going to be, do I still have the ability? Do I not still have the ability? Well, let's look at it. This year will be his year 40 year. So, wait until the end of the season, find out that time, whatever. But right now, I want a conclusion. Let's move to Jordan Love. I think even with if they move to Jordan Love, they're still going to do what they did with Rodgers in his first year starting. They're going to take a quarterback or two in the draft and let them sit behind them, maybe push them, compete with them. If they end up better than Love, more power to them. But like I said, I just want a conclusion out of it. Let's not keep dragging this on. Quit taking your shrooms. Quit sitting in your dark room for 4 hours. Make the decision and move on. If you want to go somewhere else, all right, we're going to send you somewhere else. If you want to stick around, all right, we're going to keep you around. But let's get a decision made.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of at the point where I think I still think that the most likely scenario is that he's coming back, despite the betting odds and things like that. But I mean, yeah, I think we've been over this a couple of times now. I'm ready for the Jordan Love era. Whether or not that's good or bad, it's like if it's good, then it's good. We have another starter, and if he's bad, then we're in position to pick a quarterback in next year's draft. So either way, I don't really see how it's much worse than this being mediocre again for another season.
Or we could just trade them both. I know I said that in another episode that'll be dropping here in a couple weeks, but it wouldn't shock me at all if the Packers had come out and trade Rodgers and then turn around and trade Love and just kick punt the ball and say, all right, we're starting completely over.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Well, yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that we can kind of talk about for the quarterback episode that I'm thinking of as well. But so in terms of the O line here, guys, how do you kind of feel about the O line room? I know I'm a lot more probably down on it than the consensus. I know Joe has a lot of issues with my opinions on the O line. But where are you at,
Yeah, you're
Sanjay?
wrong.
Do you feel like this is a reliable group, or are you looking to add and improve here?
I'm gonna go with Joe on this one. I actually think I'm I'm confident knowing that we have good pieces. I think there's still a huge question mark because there is still this possibility that's looming about maybe they part ways with Bakhtiari. I don't know why you would. I get it for the money side of things, but that could be a problem. And then your right tackle situation is very questionable because I don't know what Yash is year 2 of starting potentially, or if that's Zach Tom, or if Zach Tom gets moved to left tackle. As far as whatever happens with Bakhtiari, that does shake up the offensive line. I think our guard position is pretty secure for the most part. I mean, I know the right guard has been pretty iffy, but I've been hearing a lot too, and this is kind of confusing me because I thought this was kind of everybody's savior pick was Josh Myers at center, but a lot of people are actually questioning the Josh Myers at center, which I get because I've understood and I look back on tape more recently and I thought he did struggle a lot, even though for his big frame and his size, he shouldn't be getting bullied so much. But pass pro was my biggest weakness this year for this line. But I do like the O line to answer the question.
Yeah, see, I'm one of those that has been questioning Josh Meyer, and I mean it's weird because I kind of liked the pick when it happened
Same,
because
I loved it.
oh great, we got another guy coming in. He's going to take the Corey Linsley's spot. We're going to have a solid center, but I know I've made this joke during the season, but some of the best blocks Josh Myers has made has been against his own people, and that's pretty sad
Uh,
to say.
yeah, not a good thing.
But see, I'm also on the page that I think John Runyon is a solid piece because if you and I know Nick and I have had a lot of back and forth, not on show, usually in DMs or text messages and that. But if you look at your center struggling, your right tackle has been changed over so many times, you don't know who's going to be there. It kind of hurts that right guard. Whereas the left side has been pretty solid because Bach came back and once he got his confidence back and his health back, turned back into his old self. I mean, all pro right there. Jenkins, same thing. Once he got healthy and put back into his spot, your left side is pretty solid. I think what hurt the right side more was, like I said, the center and the right tackle. Yeah, Yash did well, but I don't think he's that long term solution there. Plus, he's got to have a contract. He is a free agent. So, do they pay him? Is he going to go get paid somewhere else? I think I'm never going to bash the Packers in their offensive line thinking, because ever since the days of the Marshall Newhouses and the Don Barclays and those type of guys, they've done a good job of bringing in talent. They always take two or three guys in the draft every year, and at least one of them pans out, if not two. So, I mean, as much as a lot of people consider offensive line a need, I'm even seeing guys wanting, or people wanting to draft a tackle in the first round. Okay, I understand it, but I don't think it's that much of a need compared to what we have elsewhere. Plus, the Packers haven't always had the best of luck drafting offensive linemen in the first round. I know you can point at Bulaga, love him, Iowa guy, great tackle. But then for every Bulaga, you've got a Sherrod, or you've got, what was the last one before? John Michael. For every Bulaga that you have a good one, you have a bad one. The Packers' bread and butter has always been that mid to late round type of guy, and they strive at it. So, as while I see it as a need, I don't see it as a first or second round need. More a late round, 4 through 7. So I don't I love what we have at the offensive line minus a couple of pieces. So I think we could go in next year and see that as being our one uh what's the word for it? Our one centerpiece, so to say. The one thing we'll be able to rely on next year, whether Rodgers is quarterback, whether Love's quarterback, whether Aaron Jones is here, whether he's not here, that'll be the one guy or the one part of the team that we'll be able to rely on.
I was going to say that would have been like my hottest take would have been, I think this is the most important unit compared to the quarterback situation. I think we're actually okay at quarterback. I'm actually excited about Jordan Love, and I'm actually excited about Aaron Rodgers, because maybe if he was healthy with that thumb, maybe there would have been a different story. I don't know.
Right, yeah.
But the fact that they need to be protected, and this offensive line needs to and open up running lanes for the running backs. This is the most important unit of this team.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, I think because I'm such a big believer that on any team, the O line should be, one of, if not your strongest unit. And I think this on this team especially, like we've had so many players who are like good starters in general, or like league average level starters. But I think, especially recently, we kind of struggled to get guys that are like truly like great at their positions. I think when you look, example, at like the Eagles and the Chiefs just in the Super Bowl, I think just about every single one of those players are near top 5, top 10 in their position, and you don't necessarily need that every single position. But when I think of like someone like John Runyon, I think of him as like a very high level backup with like a lot of versatility. But I don't. For me, the thing that gets me with John Runyon is like the lack of play strength. I think he, like, we've kind of been like banking on him to kind of build up or like develop more actual strength, but you don't really see it much in his game. And with the Packers type that they pick with O-line, they kind of get themselves into that situation where they pick these super athletic guys who, super agile and like quick footed, but never really get these like big, strong guys. And, you don't end up with guys like Orlando Brown, for example, who kind of like a bit more like bulkier and a bit slower. But I think, similar with like Josh Myers. I think he struggles at times with play strength, or kind of not using his strengths like, to his advantage as much. And you think of the other guys like Bakhtiari and Zach Tom and the guys they've had in the past. I mean, Royce Newman was a stronger guy, but even like on this, I always say on this O-line, there's only really one lineman that I trust to actually move people out of the way in the run game and be like a physical presence, and that's Elton Jenkins. But for me, I just think that while it's good enough what we have to survive, I think if you want to be a true competitor, and like we could just said, for the O-line to be like a strength, I really think they should be adding, not necessarily on day one, but if you think if the Packers fall in love with one of these prospects like a Broderick Jones, or if Paris Johnson falls, something like that, I would be super happy with them picking O-line in the first round.
But the one thing that I would have to say though, the Eagles are probably the one outlier in this scenario because how many teams actually have 4 guys, possibly even 5, that are like top 10 in their position? I mean, if the Lions or the Bears or the Vikings could have anything even close to what we have, I think they would be in a joyous, joyous parade, I guess, in their cities. I I just don't know if I agree with you completely on the whole unit as itself because we've seen Zach Tom come in there and actually excel at the tackle position. You have, if not maybe the biggest secret weapon that potentially could have a huge year 2 jump in Caleb Jones. And I actually hope that this guy actually starts to. It's almost like the Yash Nyman kind of project. And I hope that maybe they can find a diamond in the rough there that you could potentially wait. Like Joe said, you don't need to go in early rounds with offensive line. They've been so, they've been hitting so much on the later 3, 4, 5 rounds. And to talk about John Runyon, I don't know. I'm a big John Runyon guy. I actually think he might be going in the circle in Lambeau. I think his number is going to be up there because
Wow.
okay, maybe not his number, but I think he's just a guy that I just think the world of. And yeah, maybe Elton Jenkins should have been the first name before him, but I just love John Runyon. I think when you have a solid left side that they have, I think there's just so much like the microscope goes obviously on him, and so every mistake that he potentially does make, does get amplified a little bit more. And let's just not forget that this is still what, year 3 for him, right? He's going into year 4, I
Yeah,
believe,
something like
right?
that.
Yeah, this is
So
the last
I'd
year of his
like to give
contract.
him the benefit of the doubt. I know it's not easy for an offensive lineman to kind of get it. Bakhtiari didn't really figure it out till year 3 anyway himself, possibly even midway through year 4. So I do like where they have it. The Myers thing is the big question to me. Is he your
Yeah.
future at center? And what do you do at right tackle? Is it Yash? Because you're probably, I don't think he's going to get big bucks, but then you never know. Chicago has all this money; they could just throw.
Yeah.
Luke Getsy's just like, hey, I know this guy can play. Let's just go throw
Mhm.
money at him, and he'll come. Like that might be the only thing that deteriorates the chances of him coming back. But yeah, I don't know. Nate, I'm not on your side on this one. I'm sorry.
See, Nick, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong.
Yeah, and don't get it wrong. I think this is an above average offensive line, definitely like top 15, maybe even like the top 12 kind of. But yeah, I think this for me when I look at like Super Bowl winning teams in the past, forever, they always have ultra dominant lines on both sides of the ball. And I'm not saying that we should necessarily like target or trade up for any of these tackles because I don't actually think any of them are that safe of a bet to really be spending heaps of capital on them. But yeah, I think if it falls to us and if it comes down to like picking Michael Mayer, Brian Branch, and then like Peter Skoronski, it's like I'm going to take the offensive line in round 1. That's kind of where I'm at. And yeah, I just want more security because you always want to kind of bet. Of course you hope that players develop and things like that, but you never want to rely on that, right? I think kind of you always want to assume that you've seen like the best out of your players when it comes to building a team. So I would like to see a bit more security, especially like you said at the right tackle position because it's still kind of it's for Zach Tom, whose position was always in flux through his rookie season. It's a lot to kind of expect him to fully slot in full time at the right tackle. But yeah, that's just right.
Now, I can get behind you on that, and I don't know why I keep saying Nate. I gotta say Nick. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know why I keep saying that, but Nick, yes, because I've always been best player available when it comes to drafts. I don't think you should draft by need. I think you get a little scarce with that, especially with the pool of players. And I know the first round's pretty big crapshoot, but I think based on what you just said, and if Rodgers is traded and if you have 2 first round picks, based on who is available to you when it falls the way it is, if it happens to be an offensive line, I do like your argument about security. I have no problem with security. I think there are positions that I would probably value higher with our early round picks, for another discussion, but I do agree with you on that.
And the thing about it is with the whole development part is there's a lot of guys on roster that we don't know about because we haven't seen them. So what
Right.
are their development going to be? You got Rasheed Walker. I was really excited about that one because,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
being a seventh round pick, everybody was talking him up that, he was this stalwart on the Penn State offensive line, and he could really produce. I think that was the one that everybody thought was going to be the day one guy if somebody got hurt, over even Zach Tom and Sean Ryan. And then of course you got Sean Ryan, who, I think he's suffering from that third round curse of the Packers, because I still do not know how you can get popped for PEDs and not play it down in the NFL. I mean, that's got to be a boneheaded move right there.
That's
So
got to be a first too, probably.
yeah, so you hope he comes in and can, take that next step, get over it, and get out of his own head and be able to produce something. I mean, Royce Newman's still on the team. I'm not the biggest fan of him. I know Nick.
He's a viable backup.
Yeah, Nick
He's
kind of likes
Yeah.
him, but I've never been that keen on him. So, and then like Sanjay said, you've got Caleb Jones. So and they really like him for them to keep him on the roster like they did.
there's your big boy, Nick. There's your one big boy.
And actually, there's another
He's,
one
he's
that
definitely big.
when we start talking about prospects that I like, that could be a more polished Caleb Jones. So, but I just, yeah, to repeat myself, I know it's a need, but I don't think it's a major need to get anybody for the offensive line.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to start getting into these prospects then, if you guys are.
Sure,
Yeah, let's do it.
I think that's what we're here for.
Yeah. So, as we just kind of talked about, I don't think there's too many kind of day one targets. And I don't really think it's a situation, where we that draft 2 years ago where there was like Mekai Becton and who's the guy who plays for Tristan Wirfs and the guy who went to the Giants. I'm totally blanking, but I don't think it's a scenario where you're going to get like a day one kind of starter instantly in the first round. I think there's like guys who are really talented, and someone like Broderick Jones is like an incredible project and kind of seeing what he could become. But I don't really feel as though any of these guys are necessarily worth a top 10 pick. For example, if we traded, Aaron Rodgers to the Raiders, I wouldn't feel comfortable really picking any of these guys at 7 necessarily. But I mean, who are the guys that you think are the top of this class? Who are your favorites?
Well, I'm going to put out a hot take, and then I'll let Sanjay talk about his guy. I don't think Skoronski is going to be a high pick either. There are some things about his game that kind of scared me, and somebody's going to take him in the first round, but I really don't think he's going to end up at the tackle position, or if he does, he's not going to
No,
last long in the league. So
not a tackle for sure.
This is the one tough part about doing these kind of shows, especially before the combine comes, because obviously we don't know
Yeah.
how these guys are going to score, especially with RAS scores, because that's obviously a big aspect of how we draft and how a lot of GMs follow their their likes and dislikes. So obviously these are just they're premature targets, but I liked your list that you had here. I think there was only like a couple guys that actually that you had on here that I didn't see from my list, but Wayne Morris is actually one of my biggest ones from Oklahoma. Big tackle, actually a true tackle, which is kind of outside of Green Bay's targets, usually not targets, but their MO. They usually do find those
Right.
guards that they can transition to tackles. So it's a little outside of their MO, but I actually love that he's a true tackle. He can play both sides. And obviously this is barring whatever happens if we see some shocking news with Bakhtiari being let go or whatever, or if you don't have Yosh Nijman, maybe he does get picked up by Chicago or someone else. That does bring up the question, do you find yourself in panic mode, or do you find yourself in Nick's security blanket and getting another guy a little bit earlier? And I do love finding more true tackles than finding. That's the one thing I've always been a little upset with Green Bay, and maybe it's worked on the offensive line so far, but we always try to get these athletes and then we hope that they turn into whatever they just assume that they're just going to be these 5-tool players, and they can play all sorts of different positions. And sometimes I just wish they would get the guy that's just really good at that position. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just tired of the guy that's like, oh, he's just super fast and we could probably play him in the slot. You could probably play, in the box. It's like, no, why don't we just get a safety that truly knows how to play safety? That's kind of been my issue with the Green Bay, scouting, and how they really do draft their players. Now, don't get me wrong. It is awesome knowing that these guys have great RAS scores and that they can be, very versatile. I mean, we're seeing it with Elton Jenkins. I mean, that's awesome with the offensive line. But when it comes to these special positions, I just wish that would not be our MO. But maybe that's a little wishful thinking.
I really don't have anybody in the first round that, I mean, obviously Skoronski is going to be thrown around a lot, not just because he does have some, well, I won't say he has some. I mean, he is a talented player. I don't think he's going to stick at the tackle position. There were a couple things that I noticed with him that, they're teachable, but he's going to need some work on them. Let me get my handy dandy notebook here.
And I just want to be clear. I wasn't saying Wayne Morris was it was a first round pick. I don't know where he's supposed to be projected. I was just saying that was one of the guys that wasn't on your list that I had on mine.
Yeah, for sure.
And I always try to put the disclaimer, and I haven't done it yet, that I don't try to put rounds on players because it's so hard to tell right now. I mean, I could put a guess at it. I can go off of whatever other people rank and go from there. So by saying, he's going to be a first round talent, I'm just going by what people have him ranked right now. So,
sure.
With Skoronski, I did think he was good off the snap. He's strong. He hunted for the block. I thought his kick was kind of stiff. It didn't seem natural for him to do that kick. So I think that's where it's going to hurt him when he gets into the pros, unless somebody can teach him. And I thought he struggled a little bit against speed rushers. So I don't know if that's part of him struggling with the kick or if that's just something he's not able to handle. So I do think that him moving to guard is going to be better for him. So that puts it in. Do you take a guy in the first round that's only going to be a guard, or do you wait later on? And of course, Sanjay knows as well as we do about, family ties with his co-host Fred. Peter Skoronski's grandpa played for the Packers under the Lombardi era. So, that's the feel-good story there, to bring a kid that has that family ties to the Packers, which there was a few years back, another guy, Wyatt Davis, whose grandpa played, was Willie Davis for the Packers that I kind of hope for. But, as much as I like to say those things, that's not typically Packer MO. I mean, every so often you get that random guy that had some kind of ties with the Packers, but, to draft a guy based...
Bloodlines help, though.
They do.
I mean,
they help tremendously.
John Runyon is like a perfect example. My star, John Runyon.
So, but if we're going to go down to who I really like at the tackle position, and this one's going to be a little bit weird, and I actually had a little bit of back and forth with a friend of the show, Brian Maffey, about him. This guy's going to be a strictly right tackle guy. I don't know if he'd be fit, if he has the attributes to be able to do left or right. So this could potentially be a guy that you could slot in right away at right tackle, and that's Darnell Wright from Tennessee. This guy is the one that I was talking about, could be a more refined Caleb Jones. He's 6'6", 342 pounds. I mean, this is a giant of a man. One of the notes that I have wrote down here is when he's out there, he only looks like he's giving half-hearted effort because he's so much bigger than these other guys that he's just, it's kind of like that big kid on the playground that you just gave the ball to and said, all right, you go run, and he's slapping down these little kids and run them over, because that's basically what he was doing. Was one of the games that I watched was him against, or Tennessee against Alabama, and he was going against their top edge rusher. His name's escaping me right now.
Will Anderson, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Anderson just literally could do nothing. This guy was picking him up and throwing him around, and Anderson was having such a hard time against him. Where it looks like he's basically playing with the edges. He's just like, all right, tag, you're it. Now come get me. He stalemated Will Anderson. He moves well for a big guy. And like I said, though, the one drawback is I think he's going to be slated as a pure right tackle. I don't think you're going to be able to move him inside to guard. I don't think he's going to be able to do left tackle. Who knows? Maybe he does have the athletic ability to do it, but I think he could be a day one starter at right tackle. Now, where he goes in the draft, I don't know. Maybe, fourth round, maybe later, maybe even up to second round, depending on what his combine looks like. But that's the guy that I really liked.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the only thing that could be a concern for the Packers is like the weight, but I think he's a good enough player for you to ignore that, especially like earlier in the draft. I think he'll be a great pick. My guy in the first round that I could see them picking is Broderick Jones out of Georgia. He's like, kind of like the offensive line equivalent of a Rashawn Gary, I guess. Like super, super athletically gifted. I think he honestly has like special movement ability at tackle, and he's like super, super strong. Has a fantastic anchor. The only thing I kind of saw was a bit of inconsistency with his ability to use his hands and kind of set his feet. But I think the pure physical ability and the kind of the ceiling for him, I think, especially if they can get him like traded back, whatever, I think he'll be a phenomenal pick. He's just is kind of that kind of mold of what the Packers want in a like as far as a athletic profile from a tackle. And I think this is a staff that has a lot of faith in their ability to coach up O-line. So I could see it in round one, Broderick Jones out of Georgia. I think he could be really great for them.
And I do want to say too, I think that was a great pick, because honestly, if there's one thing that I've noticed that Green Bay started to shift in the last like 4 or 5 years, and it's the bigger schools. Like understanding
Yeah.
that these kids that are playing against probably the top edge rushers and inside linemen, I like those prospects more so than who did I have here? Let me see here. Who's my North Dakota State boy?
Tony
Oh,
Moore.
Mock,
Mosh.
yeah. And it's like I like his film, I like his ability, but it's just like, can I really put that up against a guy that was in Georgia that played
Right.
against the biggest schools and was on the biggest stage, understood the lights and the impact of clutch performing, and just knowing all that, I just put those players ahead of any small school. And I would even argue too, like a guy like Skoronsky, like in Northwestern, I don't see those games. Like, when is Northwestern playing big games other than just like their rivalry games in the Big Ten? It's just I would rather see a kid like Tippmann, from Wisconsin, where I know they're
Well, now hang on a minute, Sanjay. You're going to take a guy from Wisconsin and talk about Skoronsky not playing big games, but you're going to take a guy from.
I will. First off, I mean, are you saying that Penn State? Sorry, are you saying that Northwestern and Ohio State is a big game? Because I'll tell you right now, when they had Wisconsin playing Ohio State, they claimed that to be a big game. They were both ranked, and that happened to be a big game. And let's just be honest, Wisconsin is technically a higher ranked team than Northwestern. So in that sense,
they're also playing guys like Wisconsin is, where they're playing Michigan and they're playing Ohio State.
But let's remember, who is offensive line U? That is called Wisconsin. That is called no, they're tight end U. They are tight end U. All right. So I will say I am not. There's no shade. There's no shade to Northwestern.
Outside of running back and quarterback is always going to be Iowa. So don't give me that crap, Sanjay.
Hey, look. You know what? When Coach Fickle comes into Iowa, actually, you guys are coming to Wisconsin actually this year. So when you guys come to Wisconsin, we'll show you what's going to be the new Wisconsin with this new head coach and staff. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to make that comment just about the bigger schools. I just feel like that's kind of a trend. You saw it with Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt being selected. I just think it is something that they're looking a little bit more towards in their more skill position, or sorry, not skill positions, but they're more important positions like O-line and defense. So just wanted to throw that out there.
No, and I completely
Absolutely.
get that, because I've said it before with I've loved ever since Goody's taken over that he's went beyond a scope. With Ted Thompson, you were guaranteed you were going to take somebody from the Pac-12. You were guaranteed to take somebody from the Big Ten. and you were guaranteed to take somebody from like Mountain West and all these other conferences, but you never seen him really dip into like the big conferences. You never saw him really take anybody. Well, I guess he took Haha, but outside of that, he really never picked anybody from Alabama or Georgia or places like that. So that's the one thing I loved about Goody taking over is he just doesn't center himself on one area to draft from. He opens the scope.
But he also knows those are the 5-star kids anyway, going to those big
Right.
schools like Clemson and Georgia and Alabama and all them.
Right, and that's why I said that's what I love about it is, he doesn't just center himself on one. He opens up to all these other places, and it seems like we're at least going to get one Georgia kid, no matter what, because it just seems been his MO the last few years to take a Georgia kid. So whether it's going to be one of the safeties they got down there, whether it be Broderick Jones or
Can that edge guy fall to us? What's his name? That edge from Georgia. That's my. If we get the 7th pick, that is the one thing that I may ask for my wish list.
Which one are you thinking? Nolan Smith or
Nolan Smith? I think that's it. I think that might be.
I love him. I think he's just a little bit too light for the Packers.
Yeah, he's a little underweight, but
he was like 235. But oh my god, I loved him.
Light.
One of my favorite players.
Yeah.
Well, what was Gary though? What was Gary?
275, 280, something like that.
Yeah. He was
out of Michigan, he was 270, or did he bulk up?
Yeah, because he played a lot of down linemen.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
He didn't really stand up until he came to Green Bay. So,
Gotcha.
I think the lightest outside linebacker we've had in a long time has been, well, other than Tippa, but he wasn't drafted, was Clay. Clay was around the 235
What about
mark.
Vince Beagle? Was Vince smaller than Clay? I thought Vince was.
I think Vince was around the 250 mark.
Okay. All right.
That guy that went to Miami, the guy who led us in sacks for a year in like 2017.
Kyler Fackrell?
Yeah.
But he didn't go to Miami. He went
he went to
as in
Utah
like
State.
As in like he left us to play for the Dolphins. I mean. It's Kyler Fackrell. He was pretty light.
But he wasn't really light. He was about the 250 range, 245, 250. I'm pretty sure of that.
Right.
Because he was a big guy. He was like 6'3" something. I got a funny story about him, but we'll tell him. That'll be a whole nother podcast.
So as far as, if we do need to replace Josh Myers or John Runyon, whatever, more interior kind of players, there's a few guys that I really, really love in this class. The big name is John Michael Schmitz. I came away really, really impressed with what I saw from him. I think he has fantastic feet. He has a wrestling background. I think he just really understands kind of how to manipulate like the other defender's weight. I think he just seemed like he was always kind of in control most of the time. I love the way he uses his hands. The only thing is that, he's an older guy, he's 24 years old, but I think he has, all the physical tools that they kind of want. We'll see how he actually tests, but I imagine it won't be too dissimilar from Josh Myers, who, to be fair, was like an exceptional athlete by testing. I think he's the guy that, not necessarily, I don't think that they'll end up really prioritizing him because I think they're too committed to Josh Myers at this point, but I think he's a great prospect.
That wouldn't stop him from taking one late. I don't know what, and see, that was one of the ones that I watched for interior.
Yeah,
and the other one is Joe Tippmann out of Wisconsin. Yeah, I think he was. He was.
Joe was probably highest on my list. At least if you're gonna get a potential replacement or some insurance, because that is one thing with Josh Myers is, availability has been a little bit in question with him. So I think you have to start just factoring that in, and if it means later rounds or. Hey, I mean, if the board falls the way you want it, and it is one of these two gentlemen that gets picked, I mean, that's a nice backup.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't watch him. He's from Wisconsin, so I
get over that. You know what? Just understand. We play you. That we're not always just looking at the hospital and waving at kids. We play football.
Hey man, now don't be dissing the wave.
I'm not
because
dissing it, but
just because it's not silly.
well, what that cloud you're judging?
Song that's been around for 30-some years.
He was at the game this year. What's his name? The guy that sings that. So House of Pain is. I don't even understand why that's such a huge thing. I mean, I get it now that it is, but
because
it
they're
is
all
kind of
drunk and cold, and they have to do something to keep themselves warm. But anyway, to the guy that Nick was just talking about, John Michael Schmitz, he had a lot of good things to him. I thought maybe he struggled against strength rushers. There were a couple of times with guys that were a little bit bigger, that were a little bit stronger. He seemed to be, but it happens. And then the other thing that I thought was weird is one of the games that I watched of him, he was always getting thrown on the ground. It seemed like every other play he ended up on the ground. It's like, okay, I understand that, but is that something you want from the guy that's supposed to be the anchor of your team? So, I wouldn't be against it, but there were a couple others that I watched that I kind of liked a little bit better than him. One of them you got on your list there, at least one of them you got on your list, is Luke Whippler from Ohio State.
Yeah, he was cool too.
What better way to replace one Ohio State guy than another Ohio State guy, right? It seems like that's been the MO the last few years too. Corey Linsley, Ohio State. What do? We replace him with Josh Myers from Ohio State. Okay, what better way to replace Josh Myers from Ohio State? Luke Whippler.
They can't
from
be
Ohio
bitter,
State.
right? They can't be bitter about it because at least they know they got replaced by one of their own.
Right. So, but he's a stocky guy. He was a little bit bigger for a center, which Nick was kind of talking about earlier, where he wanted a little bit more of the power guys, and this guy looked like he could be a little bit more of a power guy. I thought his snapping looked pretty good. It's not like a Jake Hansen thing where he was a center, but the big question mark on him was he couldn't snap the ball. He looked like he moved to the second level pretty good. He had good strength, good drive forward, and he was solid at picking up the blitz. There wasn't much more that I could ask for out of him. I don't think he's going to be a high pick. He's probably going to end up like a Lindsley, be taken in the 5th or something. And then the other one I kind of looked at that I don't know too much about, but I've had a thing so far in all our episodes about talking about guys with really awesome names, and this one right here is one of my top. He's going to be in my top name draft of all time, and that's Juice Scruggs out of Penn State.
Nice.
So
I know we got Sauce Gardner, and now we have Juice Scruggs. Like, so we're gonna get one guy named Milk one year. I guarantee it.
What was the one that the Packers had as an undrafted that one year? DeBeer.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was the long snapper that people were wanting, that Cheeseman.
Oh yeah. Jamie Cheeseman, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. But anyway, Juice is another guy that was a solid built guy. Good snapping. He had good leverage. He wasn't quite as quick. He seemed a little bit slow coming off the snap. I don't know if that's just something that they teach him there. I don't know if that's just him. His strength looked good. He had good hand usage, and he drove his the guy he was blocking back pretty well. Another late round guy, and again a Penn State guy. So that's the one thing the Big Ten is really known for, is producing. As much as I hate to admit it, Sandre, Wisconsin, just like Iowa, and just like Michigan, and just like Ohio
I don't know why
State.
you keep saying Iowa. When's the last time, other than that tackle? When's your last big name offensive lineman?
We had Wirfs.
Yeah, that's it. You might have had that center. You had a center too, didn't you?
There's been a lot of them. Brendan Scherf.
Scherf,
yeah.
Austin Blythe has won a couple Super Bowls.
Okay, we're not going based on Super. Austin Blythe was not the reason that they won a Super Bowl.
No, but he's been a long-time starter.
All right.
But there always seems to be talk about first-round guys, Iowa guys in like first round, and you can't tell me that's not true. This year is going to be the one year that Iowa doesn't produce an offensive lineman that's going to be a solid starter in the NFL. And that's because Iowa's offensive line sucked along with the rest of the offense.
It's okay.
See, I can talk bad about my team, Sanjay.
Believe me, I have no problem talking about the Badgers. Let me tell you about Graham Mertz. Okay, glad that Dippin' Dots Mertz over there is gone to Florida. So
At least
we are on to better
Spencer
things.
Petras.
Huh?
At least you didn't have Spencer Petras.
Well, look, it was not good for either of our schools. Okay, let's agree to that.
But
we're on to bigger and better things.
Right. But like I said, Big Ten is known for their, blue collar offensive line guys. And that's why I think Skoronski gets a lot of talk. And it just, what better way to replenish your offensive line stock than take a mid to late round Big Ten blue collar.
I mean, hey, look, the kid from UW Whitewater just got picked by Denver, right? And he's like,
what's his name? Miners.
Yeah, no, not Miners. I forget his name, but it's just it. Sometimes with offensive linemen, maybe the school doesn't always matter. I mean, if you're a big kid and you know how to just maul people, or if you have athleticism and you have great hands, you can make it in the game. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I only want big name schools, but it does seem like Green Bay is gearing, leaning towards that a little bit more than they are Quinn Miners. Yeah. There you go. Nice.
See, I know your guys' team better than you do.
Hey, at least I got the right team. I got Denver, didn't I? All right, easy. So yeah, I agree. The Big Ten happens to be a pretty, they dip into the well there quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got to look at where the Big Ten schools are, though. They're in farm country, and they're getting them farm boys out there.
Corn-fed bread boys.
So, I got a couple others, but are there any others that you guys really want to talk about?
Nick Broker is one that caught my eye as a potential guard transitioning to tackle. I know Green Bay is really good about that. It is, outside. It's just hard for me to really talk about these prospects until I see them in Indianapolis. But I think it's key to note, like when what's his name took on as offensive coordinator. I was really wondering, Stanovich, thank you. And I was really wondering, when, if there was much of a dip on the offensive line, because isn't Butkus now the O-line, right?
Yeah.
So, which is awesome. It's cool. I get way more Dick Butkus tweets than I need to in life now that he's over here. But, I was wondering about, and I was going to ask you guys this question, to kind of transition to also the team itself. But if you were to find an offensive lineman, whether it's any of the guys that we've mentioned tonight, or maybe there's a guy that you dip into free agency, I don't know. But if there's someone that replaces a guard, right? Let's just say John Runyon's your guy. You could put him at left or right guard. But let's just say you find one more guard that you're just absolutely wowed and you need to get him on the field. Is there any way possible either of you would consider the possibility of putting Elton Jenkins at center?
Yes, but I even had a thought further to that because I keep going back to this, and I don't know if it was one of them Mandela effects or not, or if it's just something, maybe I got hit in the head one too many times before I watched it. But during the draft that year, in the draft this past year, when they announced Zach Tom's name, they announced him as a center. Yep. So I even took that a step further. Maybe not move Elton to center, but maybe Zach Tom would take over center, which still leaves a hole at right tackle. Whether that's bring Josh back, whether Rasheed Walker or one of the other guys we talked about can take over. They draft one of the guys that we're talking about. But I've really thought that maybe, Zach Tom could take over if they don't feel comfortable with Josh Myers, or maybe they move on from Josh Myers or whatever.
See, Nick, you're pooping on this offensive line, and look at all the creative possibilities we have with this offensive line.
So much mediocrity.
You're right. Maybe it might be.
No, I think it is really interesting because I think it's so easy to forget that Elton Jenkins was like a career tackle, career center in college. So I think he would actually be a fantastic fit. It's kind of like the resource management thing, but I think if you have enough guards to play around with, if Sean Ryan becomes something and if Josh Myers has to get moved to guard, I think it's definitely worth thinking about because I think he's super intelligent and it would really help. That sort of like ISO inside like run blocking because I think we kind of struggled with that in the past 2 years, like having like being able to move people in the middle of the line there. I think it would be really interesting, at least just to see it, and because he has like the athleticism to move around and basically do everything that Josh Myers does, but he's actually a cemented good player. So I think it would be really, really interesting.
Is this the first year we're not going to keep 10 offensive linemen?
Probably not. I think somehow, some way they'll figure out how to keep them just because.
Because right now I got 8.
Yeah,
I got 8 for sure. Obviously, yes, the draft changes
draft
a lot
and then UDFAs and maybe they pick up a veteran for cheap. It's all going to depend on Yash. Do they bring him back? Do they not bring him back? Does somebody throw him a lot of money? What?
I mean, we do have $24 million in cap space. I think there is that wiggle room. I mean, depending if they bring back Amos, I think you have to retain some guys. If you get a little break from Aaron Jones, if he takes a pay cut, that brings you the ability to, re-sign Yash. I mean, I think no matter what, if it's Jordan Love or Aaron Rodgers, you have to secure this offensive line. I think that is the most important, like as far as locking your own. I know a lot of people want to talk about Rashawn Gary, but it was actually kind of a blessing that he got hurt because now we don't have to like worry about that as quickly. I know it's a rude thing to say, but like at the same time, it's like if this guy would have been runner up in defensive player of the year, we'd be having a lot of different conversations, right?
Oh, I think if he would have played like he was playing before he got hurt, he could have even been defensive player.
Exactly. I agree completely.
But here's the other side of it, of the Yash thing. You've also got a guy in Zach Tom that you got to get out on the field too. Yes. So if he's not replacing Josh Myers, then who is he going to replace? Do we take
this
Grundy
brings
now?
the Bakhtiari caution again. Like this guy's
but I just don't think this year is the year to cut him because I've had this argument with a guy for a long time on one of the message boards I'm on that it doesn't make sense to cut him this year.
I agree.
It might make sense for the later years because of how much they've kicked the can down the road, but he's going to cost $24 million and only save $5 million for this year. So if you're already going to be paying him all that money, why not just let him play it out?
It's easier if you don't have Rodgers. It's an easy decision.
Right. It's easier if you don't have Rodgers or somebody. If even Rodgers has made mention that if they wanted to rework this said contract, he'd stick around. But that's kind of a little too late for that because they already owe him.
Bro,
a ton
you should
of money.
never sign a $200 million or $250 million contract.
But also, I mean, like last year he also said that he didn't care about the money at all, and he also signed a league resetting
$50
deal.
million
So
contract.
I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth at this point, to be honest.
I don't know who got him into his hippy dippy shit, but they really need to get smacked in the face because ever since he's went on to this this guru
loving life.
Yeah, he's really been a weird player.
I do remember when he just would never go on anybody's talk shows and he was very quiet and it was like, okay, this guy just goes and wins games and gets MVPs and then, then he went and started talking more.
The only one talk show he did for the longest time was the one with Wildy. Tuesdays with Aaron's, and that was the only thing he would do. And I like I said, I don't know who. I feel like Eric Cartman from South Park sometimes, fucking hippies, damn hippies.
He's classic. That's kind of why I'm kind of ready just for him to be gone, just so I can just be like, look, let's just get all that behind us. Let's just move on to this fresh new toy, and let's just see what Jordan Love can do.
So I mean, Going back to the kind of the draft thing, the only other guy that I have mentioned is Sanjay kind of brought him up earlier was Cody Mock from North Dakota State.
Yes,
I
Yeah, I
think
I
think I
really
love
do
him.
like him.
now this is another one that I kind of had a back and forth with friend of the show Brian Maffey about. When I watched him, he actually gave me Bakhtiari vibes because it just seemed like they moved similar. They had similar builds and they played similarly. He's quick, he gets low, he hunts for blocks. Might be strong, might not be the strongest, but he has good technique, and of course he's got the hair. So I mean, the Packers always
Sign
seem,
him up. Yeah, you might as well just say he's just run the card up to the table.
and then he was good at sealing the edge, and that's a
Right.
good thing in the run game is when you got a tackle that can create that edge for his back. So I mean, I know Brian was talking that he may be more of a guard than a tackle,
Short
but I
arms.
think yeah. But they keep saying that. But look at the two of the greatest tackles the Packers have had in the past 20 years: Chad Clifton and Brian Bulaga. And what were the two biggest knocks on them when they came out of college? Short arms.
Sure, but
So
look at the rest of the league,
I mean,
though.
Zach
It's
Tom
like,
has short arms too, which is crazy. That's
right.
why he's
yeah,
still been
yeah.
he's a more athletic tackle than we've seen in past. But
And like I said, I remember the Brian Bulaga draft completely, and they were just knocking him something fierce. Oh, he's going to be a guard. There's no way he can hold up as a tackle. He's got Tyrannosaurus Rex arms. And I remember the reason I remember it so much is because like 10 minutes before the Packers were up, my boss at the place that I was working at the time texted me and goes, "All right, well, who do you think the Packers are going to be taking?" And I said, "Brian Bulaga, Iowa." And boom, Brian Bulaga, Iowa was the pick. And I was like, I knew that was going to happen because that's what they needed. And what better player can you get?
I mean, you were really just saying it because it was Iowa. So.
Yeah.
Mostly,
Let's be real.
But no, other than that, I don't have any more that I really have a lot of
Yeah.
notes on. So is there anybody else you guys really want to talk about?
I have one guy who I think is like the perfect, like, prototypical.
Well, I don't know if I trust
Packers
your
type.
evaluations.
Well, he's not from Iowa, so I guess that's already a point lost there.
Yeah, I was gonna say if there's anybody that has to be questioned, it might be you, Joe. Because you're so biased.
Yeah. There's no rugby player that I'm scouting for the O line like the Eagles did. But I still think that's so ridiculous that you can get drafted based on your tape from another sport. Anyway, my guy Braden Daniels out of Utah, I think he could be kind of like middle of the draft kind of pick. I think he's like the guy the type that they love. I think he's like a really natural blocker. You rarely see him panic. He's usually in control. He's super versatile. He played left guard and both tackle spots for like extended periods of time at Utah. Again, he's like one of these guys who is super athletic in space, can really block well on the second level, moves around really well. It's just the kind of lack of like a really dominant anchor. But I think he has a great ability to use his feet. And, like I said, he's just a guy who just knows how to play the position. I don't think you'd have any trouble slotting him at either position. I mean, he probably is a guard. But, it's in terms of this kind of shoring it up, this security blanket like we've been talking about, I think he's the kind of pick that the Packers would love. And, kind of like you said, I think Cody Morch is like, he's that kind of guy. I think is, very much like the Packers type, and he's so athletic and such a quick-footed player. The only thing with Cody Morch is that he's 24 years old, which makes it kind of tough. He was in college for 6 years.
Yeah, but usually when you take them in the later rounds, it doesn't, as long as they're not like 32 and shit like that, the age doesn't matter too much.
But,
it's usually the first rounders.
Cody Morch isn't going to last past day 2. No way.
Who knows? I really, you'd never know.
Just in terms of like the guard
line is
prospects
so
in that area.
weird. Right, but offensive line is so weird where guys can be like 37 and still be playing offensive line at, a decent. I mean, look at Jason Peters. I think he's still in the league and he's like 170 years old. So
Yeah, but yeah, I think he's a guy. I think he's going to like test remarkably well. So I think he's going to be one of those people that the kind of NFL falls in love with based on like physical traits and things like that, as well as what he showed on tape. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because they're really every year you look at the draft and you say, oh, there's so many different players who are really good, and you get down to like obviously pending the combine, you see a lot of their physical profiles, and it's like actually there's really not that many people that the Packers will draft out of each position group. So I always find it really interesting. I mean, Brian Murphy did a really good write up that I shared the other day, kind of really detailing just how the Packers have drafted and their trends like down to every single test. And that was a really interesting read and pretty eye-opening actually, which is why, a lot of these guys like DeJuan Jones, who I really liked, and like Osiris Torrance out of Florida, I think those are really fantastic players, but I don't see the Packers drafting them because they're all like 350 plus. And it's just kind of funny, it's one of those things I always think about because, even like Nolan Smith, like we just talked about, it's like, it's a real long shot to see him getting drafted by the Packers because they just have such a specific type of what they want.
Yeah, they do, and I don't know what it works for him for the most part.
Yeah, no, yeah,
As much as people like to shit on the Packers draft classes, even though they may not turn out tremendous star talent, they're still getting production guys out of a lot of their draft picks. So,
And this might have been Goody's best draft class last year out of his
yeah,
10,
absolutely.
at least down the board or across the board. I think he may. I mean, hopefully, I'd like to hope that at least 4 or 5 of these guys stick around compared to some of the other classes.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's all I got for you guys. What do you think? What's our overall thought of the offensive line? Are we good? Are we in trouble?
I don't think would put us in trouble by any means, but I think I like knowing that we have options everywhere. I know there's some questions that just need to be answered probably by the end of March. But I think when it comes to training camp, I trust the scouts and Brian to at least have the right guys available, for us to see what we can, work out in training camp and see the battles happen. And, whatever happens by week 1, I think regardless of who's under center, I think offensive line will not be the thing that we're worried about, barring any injuries in camp.
I agree.
Yeah. I think I think for all the complaining that I did at the start of the show, the O line is definitely good enough to get through the regular season, and probably 80% of teams, if you don't have a dominant pass rush, I think it's a fine, it's a fine O line. And then, they're generally well coached, and even with Butkus taking on most of the responsibility, they're still a well coached O line. It's just, for me, again, the concern is just at the very top end of the NFL when you're going against, the 49ers, the Eagles. I mean, they're probably going to lose some guys this season as well. But you think about like the top pass rushes that you're going to face when it comes down to winning it all. That's the only concern that I have. And I think, even this last year, that they were good enough to get through the regular season. It's just kind of the injuries really bit them and things like that. But, I have zero concern of them doing well. It's just dominating and kind of finishing all the way.
But was there really anybody that scared you, knowing what you just saw in the playoffs? If you would have seen the path, well, no, that's what I'm saying.
49ers.
That you say the Eagles, but we played the Eagles in the season, and I don't, outside of Rodgers getting hurt, I think we played pretty well against their defense.
Oh, we played pretty well against them, but I think
defensive line. Sorry,
right? But I think as well as they are as hot as they were getting towards the end of the season, they were just they were on a next level. Now I know obviously the Chiefs handled them pretty good in the Super Bowl, but I don't know, that Eagles defensive front was scaring me a little bit.
And now you factor in potentially a Jordan Love who can scramble a little bit better. I do think, but anyway, go on.
So yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I just think, when it comes to the playoffs, it's just so different. I think it's really easy to get away, even against the same teams. Kind of get away with things, and then in the playoffs when you kind of turn it up and you're kind of intentionally scheming a lot more things to just beat the opponent in front of you. I think I think. Yeah, they're fine. It's just, and also the other thing to me is just the run game is what kind of concerns me, that ability to consistently keep the run game going, that's why I kind of want them to, guys who are a little bit stronger, especially in the middle, because I think there were so many times, like especially AJ Dillon, I think his vision was a little bit compromised, whatever this year, not as nice as it was the year before, but I think a lot of it was just poor blocking in the middle, or the lack of ability to create free space in the middle of the field. I think there's so many guys on the team who are really great at the second level. Like I think you'll have no trouble against like linebackers, but yeah, when you have like those big kind of defensive tackles and nose tackles, I think they kind of struggle to impose their will on the defense. And when you're trying to run out the clock, the style of ball they want to play, where you're controlling the ball, I think that's kind of more necessary. The pass blocking guys are really helpful when you're like throwing the ball a lot. But if you want to support Jordan Love more, I think it's even more valuable just to have guys who can just keep things going.
All right. Well, I got one more question that I've been asking everybody at the end of the podcast. And then we'll let you go because I know you got to get going here pretty quick. But the question is, out of all the guys that we talked about here tonight, no explanation, no nothing, just who is the one guy that you want to see in the Packer uniform, or who will be in the Packer uniform come, training camp?
Ooh. Really putting me on the spot here. I would probably, and it's funny that I'm saying this because I said, big schools, but I'm going to say Cody Mach. I think he screams Packer.
Absolutely.
I think he has versatility. I don't know if they're going to go too far away from what they've known as working for their, their development of offensive line and their scouting. I still think that I think they're still going to be reluctant to draft a true tackle, which is kind of mind-boggling. But you know what? They have not shown me that they cannot draft an offensive line, so I will trust their process. So that would be my guy.
What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, it's really hard to disagree with that one. Yeah, I would like for it to be Broderick Jones, but as Sanjay just said, I have a tough time seeing them going tackle with like a high draft pick. So yeah, I want to say the guy I brought up at the end, Braden Daniels out of Utah. I just think he's the perfect kind of late round, middle round flyer. He's such a Packers type, versatile kind of dude who's played tackle but can play inside as well. And it kind of fits the dimensions of what they're looking for in the offensive lineman. And I don't think they're so committed to their players. I don't think they're gonna look to replace Josh Myers with a true center early in the draft anyway. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Braden Daniels.
All right. Well, I'm down to two, so I'm trying to like flip a coin in my head real quick.
Is that the Bible?
No, this is my scouting notebook.
I know.
This could be my scouting Bible.
It just looked like it looked like the thickness of it too. Obviously, the flap completely took it away from being the Bible. But
well, somebody got this for me years ago for Christmas, and I had no use. Not that I had no use for it, but I never knew what I wanted to do with it. And then
that's your mock draft.
Yeah, that's It's all. It's nice
prospects,
but I screwed up and I wrote in it backwards.
Oh
my! Oh god!
See, that's what I would see. I would see Nick doing that because aren't they like backwards with everything?
Yeah, everything. I'm actually hanging off the ceiling right now. It's kind of.
But my guy, I got to say, is, and kind of to go against what Nick just said about he doesn't see them taking a true center. If you think about it, unless you consider Zach Tom that backup there, or maybe Elton, there is nobody that can play that center position outside of
Jake Hansen. He's so good.
Oh yeah, that was
Jake Hansen's going to find his way back. He's going to find his way still on this team. God. He's going to be one of the 10 or 11.
I don't understand it. I do not understand it.
But
it's like Tyler Davis, man. I don't get it.
I think just to go with it, I think Juice Scruggs. Just
you
because
just want
of the
name. Yeah.
Name value.
But two, I really did like what I saw out of him. It was either him or the kid from Ohio State, and I think the name clinched it. So I'll go with Juice.
All right, this is it right here on the pod on 2/16/23. You will get a Juice jersey, and you will put it as Juice, not Scruggs, if they draft him.
Damn right
That's
I
it.
would. I was just going to say,
All right.
you didn't even have to say anything else. I was just getting ready to say that I'd probably end up getting a jersey of it. And I was just going to say that if they do not put Juice on his jersey, no, even just his game day jersey, that'll be like a felony crime.
I
Because,
agree.
but like I said, I think they need to bring in somebody just to play like that Lucas Patrick role. Maybe play a little bit of guard, but definitely be that backup center. So it was either him or I don't know. I can't pronounce his name right. It's either Weipler or Whippler out of Ohio State.
Yeah.
Good picks.
Yeah. Cool. Is there anything that you want to plug for yourself, Sanjay, before I do the outro here?
Again, yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me on. We'll have to have you guys on the Freezer podcast. We have some pretty big news to announce pretty soon. So
Nice.
definitely stick around for that. But yeah, you can find me on the Freezer podcast. We're on YouTube and on basically Facebook. Yeah, Facebook through the Sweep Studios. And obviously through Game On Wisconsin. But yeah, I really appreciate being on here with you guys. This was a fun conversation. Hope we can do it again.
Yeah, awesome.
Anytime, my man. We're glad to have you on. You're the first of the Freezer podcast we got on here.
Damn straight. As long as I'm on there before Matt, we're good. I can understand Fred in this circumstance because he is our resident offensive lineman. So, but I'm glad that I was actually on here first. So,
and happy we were able to get schedules worked out. We were actually going to record last week, but things happen. Life gets in the way.
Damn kid, tell you.
But yeah, it was great having you on. I love the talk, and you've got an open invite anytime.
Awesome.
Yeah. So as always, guys, you can find us on Twitter. You can find Sanjay at SanjayXMurthy, myself at NicholasGRGR, and Joe at Iowa_Joe86. The podcast at Outback_Packers. Until next time, we'll see you later.